So hello, and welcome to the first webinar from the Teaching with Small Boats Alliance. Today we're going to be discussing program planning, and it's a panel discussion. We've got a great panel. We've got Lory Newmyer, formerly of the Hull Lifesaving Museum. We've got Rich Eisenberg from the Bayfront Maritime Center in Erie, Pennsylvania. And we've got Tyson Trudel, who is from the Center for Wooden Boats in Seattle. And I am Joe Youcha from Building to Teach and the Alexandria Seaport Foundation. So today we're going to be talking, as I said, about program planning. And the first part that we want to talk about is really specificity and knowing what you're doing, for whom, by whom, and with what goals. And before we proceed further, I'd like to say that this is all based on a workshop that Lory led during the last Teaching with Small Boats Alliance conference up at Mystic Seaport in October of 2013. So, all right, guys, specificity. What are we doing? For whom, by whom, with what goals? Laura, you wanna
Well, I'll just jump in with why when we ran that workshop and Tyson was on that panel, why I put that as the first slide, because I think this question of being very specific, of really understanding that while we're tempted to be all things for all people in our work, we really need to think very carefully about what can we actually achieve and for whom, using what tools, is terribly important. In the case of the Lifesaving Museum, we ran something called the Maritime, and still do, the Maritime Apprentice Program, which is a job training program for high-risk youth in the city of Boston. And so we gave an enormous amount of thought to what specifically that group, this very, very finite group, needed, what services they needed in order for us to be able to get to our goals. And I can get into what those specifics are, but I don't want to, we can move on and then come back.
Well,
do you want me to get into those specifics now?
Well, no. I mean, I think that specificity in program design is the key, and as is making sure that you have mission alignment. It's gotta make sense for your organization. I mean, Rich, where have you had examples of when specificity has worked well and when it hasn't worked well? Do you have any examples of when it hasn't worked?
When it hasn't worked. We have more examples of when it has worked. One of our bigger programs is the Bayfront Alternative Education Program, and those, like Lory's kids, inner city kids, high-risk kids, and kids that weren't achieving success in a traditional high school setting. And they've been removed from school for chronic disruptions and various issues on campus. And so our program was designed specifically for these kids to help them be able to reintegrate back into their home schools. And social skills is a big part of it, besides math and science and all the other subjects. So, yeah, we have to focus on, look at who we have in there and dial the program up or down or left or right to achieve success with these specific kids.
Great. Tyson, you have an example of specificity?
Well, building on what Rich just said, I think that's where I find myself right now in our designing our programs at the Center for Wooden Boats is going back and redefining and taking what we've learned over the last 3 years in our employment training program and kind of re-specifying. Okay, so we've learned all this stuff, and now we know that we can even narrow down further into the kids that we're really able to succeed with. Whereas we started, so our program's about 4 years old, and when we started we had a slightly broader net. And through our experience we've been able to say, okay, these guys, and now we're looking at, okay, we know the kids that we can reach and we can work effectively with, and let's dial in on what that really specific population needs.
I mean,
and Joe, if I can just jump on that for a sec.
sure.
I think that, you know, for the purposes of this webinar, if we're thinking about people who have an enormous amount of enthusiasm and know they have a great idea and they're trying to figure out, how do I take my idea and put it into action? These 4 questions, what are you doing, for whom, by whom, and your goals, really just deserve an enormous amount of thought, more thought than probably any of the 4 of us put into it when we jumped in. But I think as you know, become a practitioner, these are some of the things you learn. Gee, it would have been great if I'd really understood who was my ideal population 20 years ago. On the other hand, learning as you go is great, and I think while we're emphasizing that it's great to know all of these answers, to me it's really important to ask all these questions and to keep asking that question, and to be able to have your program be flexible and responsive enough that if you figure out that, you know, the population you're working with is the great population for you for a myriad reasons, but there's some other tool you need or some other technique you need to be using, you're flexible enough to change that as well.
Well, I think if I were able to go back to the beginning of my program planning process for our employment training program, I would have drawn more people into helping answer these questions. So we kind of did it with our staff and our 1 or 2 really close partners that we'd worked with over the years. But in the last 3 years, I've been able to broaden out and get a wider network, and that has really helped kind of help us figure out what works in our community. And so, I don't know, cast a broad net if you can, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm hearing from you guys is what I certainly learned, which is that the programs are living things, and they're constantly evolving, and you know, you always want to improve them because, you know, you don't change, you die, right? And so you're constantly improving them, but you really do need to keep your eye on the ball of who you're serving. The example that that we had in Alexandria is that when we started in 1992-93, we had a large population who were in you know, subsidized housing and housing projects, in affordable housing. And Alexandria is a city of about 120,000. In the 20 years or so, the city lost 20,000 affordable housing units. Mm. So the population that we were serving moved, and so our programs had to adapt. And there was always a lag time, because once you got the program up and running and humming, then your situation changed, and you had to adapt. You were almost, Tyson, doing exactly what you described. You know, bringing in the partners that you're working with as your situation changes to revise the program.
And situations changing might include funding priorities for the city in which you're working, or research demonstrating that some subset of the population you serve is really critically in need of what you have, so you may need to develop new skills to better serve that population. I mean, there's so many external forces that may be shifting those changes, even while we might want to keep doing the same thing the same way. And as you say, we're not going to survive if that's our mindset.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, for me as a manager, that was a constant battle to get my staff. I mean, they were like, "But we just got it working." I'm like, "Too bad, you got to change it," you know.
There's a large amount of diversity in each group too, each class. I mean, you say inner city kids and kids that aren't achieving success, and in that 9 kids in that class. There's a couple English language learners from this continent, a couple English language learners from Eastern Europe, a couple kids that are really bright and might have had an older brother's beer can in their car, and a couple other kids that are just struggling and autistic or whatever. It's an extremely diverse group, and you have to be ready to meet each of these kids. And it changes. It changes day to day, really. What happened at night, what happened at home, what happened in the neighborhood. You have to be ready every morning for who walks into your classroom.
Yeah. I mean, we've had a huge situation where locally we've lost the African American population has decreased, but the African immigrant population has greatly increased. But people look at these kids and they see their skin color and they say, hey, they're black. So they treat them the same.
Right.
And it's totally different culture.
Right.
And that's really been interesting to try and work with. We've done programming where the local churches are trying to build bridges between those two populations, and that's been some very interesting work. I mean, this all takes us to Lory's next point, in which is she identified the 10 key elements of program design, which are content, clientele, staffing, intensity of services, partners, outreach, timelines, assessment, and here you're talking about outcomes and outputs, outcomes, and then follow-up. And so this is kind of a checklist to make sure that you know what you're doing when you're either rolling out a new program or revising it. So the first one on the list is content. Do you somebody want to take content of how you figure out what it is that you're going to do with your clients? Anybody want to take that?
Can I jump in and just talk for a sec about why these 10 things kind of emerged for
Absolutely.
us over time? Because again, this was all OJT for me and my organization, learning how to run the kind of programming we did. So, this is stuff we figured out in the classic building the plane while flying model. But most of it has turned out to be pretty solid as we matured into an organization doing the work we're doing. The obvious thing was the content, kind of what are we doing? And that sort of grows out of the passion of the people who are starting it. And, I love to build boats, so of course I love to teach others how to build boats, which actually doesn't turn out to be quite the same thing, but at first it looks like it does. But some of the stuff that was a little trickier was thinking about stuff like intensity of services. And again, that went back to the next question of who are your clientele? What are their needs? And what is your institutional capacity? How are you going to attract, you've got this awesome product, but how are you going to get people in the door? I mean, things that we just didn't know were going to be challenges turned out to be some of the biggest stumbling blocks. And in some ways, things like funding, which I don't mean to say isn't a big challenge, but initially it may seem like the hardest thing of all. And in the end, it's sort of black and white. You're going to have to figure that out, but it's not ultimately the hardest thing of all. At least for us, it wasn't.
I agree. I mean, I think for us, what we would divide our program, the process really into 3 steps. One was referral, the second was the program, and the third was placement. We were doing workforce development, and so the things that were the hardest for us to do was the stuff that didn't happen in our shop. So it really was the referral and then the placement. And that the work in the shop was actually pretty straightforward and pretty easy. I mean, not easy, but pretty straightforward. But in order to have a valuable program, we really had to be able to get the right clients into the program, and then we had to be able to place them out into meaningful work that allowed them to run the rest of their lives and take care of their responsibilities. So, I mean, I think this checklist is great, and like you said, I wish I'd had it when I was starting out. I say, it's a too soon old, too late smart, right?
Right.
So,
I think that I'll cede the floor for a second and come back.
Yes. Oh, you're no, you got it. You got it. I clicked the button here on the screen, dear.
Our content, we're using boats because we have this beautiful natural harbor, and it's our passion, sailing and boat building. The clients that we have, the students, it's not really their passion. But when you're teaching, it's not. These are inner city kids that most of them have never been on a boat. A lot of times the first boat they're ever been on is a boat that they built, which is a real powerful experience. But so teaching kids how to build boats and teaching kids how to be safe out on the water isn't, it looks like what we're doing, but really it's all the soft skills that we're just using that as a vehicle to do this. Work as a team and problem solve and persistence and perseverance and working through your frustrations. Those are the real skills that are important on any job site, any classroom, any family unit for their entire lives. Now, some of them turn out to be amazing in the shop with hand tools and power tools, and so the content, if not many of these kids would have chosen, I want to go build boats at my school during the day. It's different, I think, in a lot of the other schools in the Alliance. They're thrown in with us, and if you're passionate about that subject, whether it's motorcycle engines or gardening or cooking, I think that you can relate to the kids that way. You can't fake that passion, and our clients, they're BS meters are so sensitive. You can't fake that passion. You can't do it.
No, I mean, for us, the boat building brings in the volunteers, and it's really the volunteers who are working alongside the kids, and so that's the equivalent of another 5, 6, 7 full-time staff for us at the Seaport Foundation. That's and like you said, also 80% of the way we put it is that 80% of what we do is socialization, and just 20% are really the hard skills.
Right.
But it's the hard skills that you can measure. Now, with what I do, I focus on the math because it's measurable. The school's needed. It gets you in the door, and then you can go do the work that you know that you need to do, which is the socialization work. Tyson, what are you finding? I mean,
we often think that the so-called soft skills, which we all know are the hardest things to teach, aren't measurable, and certainly they're harder to measure. But I think, one of the words that's not on this list is data, and I do think actually it is a key element of program design, or at least assessment. I became a total data junkie about 15 years ago when I realized that the landscape that I was working in had really changed. I mean, 30 years ago in the world we're in, doing work that just was kind of wholesome and got people feeling good, that really was pretty much good enough. But somewhere in here, we needed to begin to really produce outcomes, measurable, hard outcomes, that we could show to funders and show to our clients so that they knew that the time they were investing was valuable. And I think so. We might think about a future webinar that really talks about how to collect data and what are useful data points to collect, because it's, again, figuring that out wasn't first nature to me, but I did, and it's, if I can do it, anyone can do it, and everyone can love data. But it's very, very exciting when you begin to realize that while it's hard to measure data on sort of, did I feel good, better today than I did yesterday? You can do that, and there are lots and lots of tools you can use, but mainly you're trying to use data to make an argument to yourself, your staff, your board, your funders, and your students that the work they're doing has real value and that they should persist with it.
Well, and you know, as wooden boat builders, if you know, we're craftspeople, and if you can't measure what you're doing, how are you going to figure out how to do it better? You know, I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, Rich, what are you using for measurement tools, and how do you find that you keep track of your outcomes and successes?
Lory's right. It's a hard thing to do. We have pre-tests when kids are coming into the program, and post-tests when kids are leaving the program, and we try to find trends. If the kids are feeling better about themselves, if they're realizing the value of their education, if their future goals and future plans are becoming more positive. And one of the big things is these kids, a lot of them, some of them don't have a positive future view of themselves, and that's really debilitating. If you don't have a positive goal for the future, then it's much harder to make good choices. Do I get into the car with these shady people or not? And is it going towards my goal of becoming a nurse or becoming a boat builder or making something of my life? The other thing that's real hard about collecting this data is this population moves and moves and moves and moves, and tracking the kids, and the HIPAA rules and just the privacy rules in schools these days. It's really pretty hard. One of the things we've done is set up social media, a Facebook group that the kids can join into, and we send out email blasts, and we ask them to respond, and we give away. There's some prizes for we pick 10 of the responders, and they get a coupon for this or that, and we try to put incentives so they do actually respond to the emails and answer the questionnaires. And we're lucky enough that a bunch of our kids come back to visit and say hi. I mean, on a pretty regular basis, which is not that unusual for our after-school program, but it's quite unusual for an alternative education program, because kids want to get that part of their life behind them when they get in there for something they did wrong, and then they want to do what they have to do and get out of there and just stay away. But they come back in just about weekly and check in and see what's going on, what our projects are.
That's really interesting, because one of the things that we saw, we did a survey of our graduates several years after they had graduated the program, and we asked them what had the most impact for them, what the whole experience, their time with us, what had the impact. And it wasn't the program. It was the social times outside of the program when they were accepted as part of our group. So in other words, when we went to boat shows, hey, they were part of the Seaport Foundation. They weren't an apprentice. They weren't, a kid who was coming out of the gang. They weren't anything like that. They didn't have any labels. They were just accepted by the boat building and boating community. And those occasions were what they pointed to as being the most meaningful for them.
Yeah. An unexpected outcome.
Totally unexpected. That's Tyson, what about you?
Then, Joe, that as an organization, you would take that feedback from the kids, and now you would more purposefully integrate that kind of activity into your annual plan.
Absolutely.
That's what's so awesome about getting that information back from our students.
Yeah. So the informal times become just as important as the formal times. If you figure that out. Tyson, how about you? What about your measurement and data, use of data?
Yeah, we do a lot of it as like Rich and Lory were describing. We do pre-tests and post-tests, and we do some on the hard skills, but more it's on the soft skills. And we use some tools that kind of focus on the individual's experience of themselves, and how are they progressing in how they view themselves, and then how they view themselves in relationship to others.
Yeah, I mean, it's all important work, and it's all important stuff to keep in mind when you're planning the program. So we've been talking for about 25 minutes, and we've covered the first 3 slides of Lory's workshop. So what I'd like to do is wrap this section up as our first webinar, and we'll continue the conversation in a minute.